It's very unfortunate, as I said a minute ago, that we live in a world full of hope. We live in a world surrounded by self-help books. And one of the things about self-help books is they're constantly telling us to get out of bed and achieve things and do wonderful things. I undertook a few years ago a bit of a study of the self-help genre. And I came across a self-help book which was perhaps one of the most depressing books I think I've ever read, unintentionally. It's by a man called Anthony Robbins. I don't know if any of you know him. Please don't read him if you don't. A few years ago, he wrote a book called Awaken the Giant Within. And the essential point is that all of us are small, he said, but all of us have a potential giant. And by reading his book, $16 on Amazon, we can start to grow and do amazing things. And he described how he had once been poor and small and depressed, and fat as well, but he went on a diet, etc. I've got a little quote for you here. He goes, I discovered a magical power in me to take back control of my physical well-being. I permanently rid myself of 38 pounds of fat. Through this dramatic weight loss, I attracted the woman of my dreams. I married her, and I created the family I'd always desired. I used my power to change my income from subsistence level to over $10 million a year. This moved me from a tiny apartment where I was washing my dishes in the bathtub because there was no kitchen, to my family's current home, the Spanish-style Del Mar Castle, a picture of which he helpfully includes in his book. Okay. We all know the type of book. They're out there in Waterstones and everywhere else, and they're very, very depressing, but they're part of a wider movement, and that is the feeling that everybody can succeed, that opportunity is not just for the few, it's for the many. This is the message we hear from every single politician who ever stands up on a pulpit. Everyone can do it. No one should hold you back. You can do it. It's a beautiful idea, except it's got some serious drawbacks. One of the most serious drawbacks is it constantly leaves us feeling envious. Let me talk to you about envy. The interesting thing about envy is you don't envy everybody. It's, I think, very unusual for anyone in this room to envy the Queen. Anybody envy the Queen? I don't envy the Queen. The reason we don't envy the Queen is she's too weird. She's just so remote from us, we can't really relate to her. She lives in this odd palace, etc. However, who in this room has not envied someone at a school reunion or at a university reunion, or by reading something in the paper about someone they were once at school with or at university with? Anyone not felt that emotion? Oh, few, but not very many. About the same level as impotence. So basically, the reason for this is a sense of opportunity. We don't feel that we will envy the Queen because she feels too strange, she feels distant from us. We don't feel equal to her. As soon as you feel equal to somebody, as soon as you feel, I'm basically more or less like this person, and I could do this too, but you haven't, you will start to get envious and depressed. So a feeling of opportunity and equality and the fact that everybody can make it, this is, strangely, a really, really depressing starting point, which constantly leaves us a feeling that we haven't achieved enough. There's an interesting thing. When I was doing my little study of American self-help books, it struck me that if you look at self-help shelves in America, but I think probably all over, there are really two kinds of books. The first kind of book is like the Anthony Robbins type of book. You can do it, you can make it, it's out there. The other kind of book is books telling you how to cope with what's euphemistically termed low self-esteem. And I think there's a real relationship. A society that tells people that they can achieve anything will also be a society that very swiftly develops a problem of self-esteem. Because simply if everybody expects to achieve everything, you're going to get an awful lot of people who are feeling that something's gone dramatically wrong with their lives. It's probably as unlikely today that you could become as successful as Bill Gates as it was unlikely in the 17th century that you could join the ranks of the French aristocracy. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels, from opening most magazines, etc., that if you had a garage and knew a little bit about software and had a few bright ideas, a few contacts, you could get there. Simple, really. It's not. Statistically, it is unbelievably small. I was talking to somebody in venture capital the other day who said to me that something like 98% of all business ideas ever submitted will fail. We don't hear that. We don't hear those stories. We are focused on a very, very small minority. Another thing that you always hear, another very optimistic but very depressing idea that is proposed in our optimistic society is the idea of meritocracy. Now, what is meritocracy? Meritocracy is the idea that if we all work hard enough at making society fair, we will be able to build a world where anybody can make it. You hear politicians on all sides of the political spectrum praising meritocracy. How can we get the school system working well enough that it can make a meritocratic world come true? Now, the interesting thing about a meritocracy is that it's got some very nasty, cruel side effects. If you really believe that we can build a world where everybody is going to end up where they merit to be, where they deserve to be, you'll also end up with a society in which anybody who doesn't, as it were, make it, deserves not to make it. If you believe in a world where those people who get to the top merit their success, you're implicitly also setting up a society where people deserve to fail and merit to fail. And the more people believe that we do live in a meritocracy, the more people will be very hard on themselves if they fail and very tough on others. I remember a little while ago I was in America, which is, after all, the center of meritocracy in many ways, of belief in meritocracy. And there was I was at a dinner with some friends, and everyone had a bit too much to drink. And there were a lot of jokes being made about white trash and trailer trash. And there was lots of hilarity about trailer trash and how funny it was that people were living on the edge of cities in caravans and having children with their children and all this sort of thing. And I said, oh, hang on a minute, this doesn't sound particularly funny here. I mean, what's going on? And this friend of mine piped up and she said, this really makes me feel my blood boil, because, you come from Europe and, you're all socialists and essentially you believe, that there's something wrong with this kind of attitude, whereas really I only got to where I got, and she was quite a high-powered person. I only got to where I got because I've worked hard. She said, my father was an alcoholic, but I made it, and I made it because of me, and so I deserve to be at the top. And if someone's in a trailer home, well, they're in a trailer home, and that's their problem, and don't expect me to pay for them. Now, that's an attitude you sometimes hear, and it's the attitude that's precisely the result of meritocracy. Now, I think it's absolutely impossible to have a meritocracy. It's completely crazy to imagine that we will ever reach a society where people will really deserve their success and totally deserve their failure. There is simply too many factors in anybody's life. And to expect that you can simply take a reading of somebody's life and determine from that whether they deserve to be there or not is simply unbelievable. Again, if we go back to our Romans and our Stoics, think of the goddess of fortune. An ancient Roman who did well did not think that he or she was entirely responsible for the success. They knew that it was the goddess of fortune. The goddess of fortune had done it. And so instantly, if something went right, you went to give an offering to the goddess of fortune to basically say thank you. I didn't sell my company for millions of pounds. I didn't, win public office. The goddess of fortune gave this to me. It's a gift. And that gift may be taken away. I don't own it. That gift says nothing about me. That gift is really, as it were, in the hands of somebody else. Again, we've lost sight of this. We've become much more optimistic. We believe that we are in control of our destinies, and with that belief in control comes serious self-esteem. People commit suicide, weirdly, a lot more nowadays, and a lot more in societies which are felt to be individualistic, where the individual is felt to be entirely in control of his destiny. The rate of suicide goes up. And the reason for that is that all failure is assumed to be a personal point of blame. So people assume their success and they assume personally their failure. And that's why rates of suicide are higher. The interesting thing about a recession is that in recessions, certain kinds of suicide go down in number. Why is that? Because suddenly there is a public explanation for failure. And that public explanation is a huge burden that's lifted off our backs. In fact, people continue to fail at all times of the economic cycle, but suddenly there's a story, a publicly available story for why there is failure. Now, Nietzsche thought that was all a very, very bad idea, and he very much believed, now incidentally, he was poor, totally forgotten, and in many ways wretched, but the difference he thought was that he embraced the darkness. He didn't say, I'm sad, but, he didn't say, there are things wrong with my life, but they're not really wrong. He said, there are things wrong with my life, and I'm sad about it. He embraced the pessimism. He admitted to the pessimism. And this is really the essence of what I'm trying to say now, that pessimism is a feature of life. It's a feature of life that we often try and run away from. By running away from it too quickly, we cut ourselves off from the opportunity to embrace this darkness and to embrace the lessons that it often brings. And we often also cut ourselves off from the deepest kind of relationships which we can have with other human beings, which are relationships based around a confession of suffering. And I think that essentially all good friendships are about confession of one sort or another. They're a confession of things that the rest of the world thinks of as unacceptable, but are in fact part of human life. So all of us now, we're going to have a little bit of time to have some tea and cakes, and also there's going to be a confessional box. But really what I hope that we'll take away from the next few minutes is going to be a sense of shared communion around the dark things and a capacity to admit among ourselves just how hard we find everybody and life. So join me in being sad and in eating some misfortune cookies, which will also be at the back. But thank you all very much, and I hope that today goes quite badly. Thank you.